Hello. Yeah, so I'm Robert. That was a very kind introduction. Thank you, Mr. Tony. I appreciate being here today. Today we're going to be talking about variant analysis and root cause analysis. I'm going to be completely honest here. This is going to be more of like a understanding a mindset and a thought process presentation because root cause analysis and variant analysis it is not really dependent upon techniques. All right. It's mostly centered around what are the questions I'm asking and what are the answers I want. Because with anything you're doing, anything you're analyzing, you can ask any question and you can receive any answer. But the methodology and the mindset of why you're asking a question is very important at these early stages in all your analysis. So that's what this entire talk is going to be about. And, we're going to be able to do like questions, answers. I keep things pretty informal for these type of things. I like to be somewhat engaging and just, make it a good time all around. Because sometimes sitting in a presentation can be kind of boring, but hey. All right, so starting out, we have vulnerabilities and remediation. In this presentation, we're going to discuss vulnerabilities, what they are, different types of manifestations. This is important because later on we'll be understanding the difference between manifestation and implementation. Two similar, but very different concepts when it comes to analysis. When we're looking at vulnerability classes in relation to languages, this is extremely important because every single programming language has its own, what everyone calls common pitfalls and issues. Then we'll be looking at remediation techniques and then variant analysis, and then finally root cause analysis or RCA. As mentioned previously, this is not like an in-depth, full-on here's the step-by-step guide on how to do every single one of these things. This is more of a initial presentation to act as a, hey, this is something you should be doing. This is something that people need to be thinking about. Variant analysis and root cause analysis are not new concepts. They've been around for a long time, but for some reason, like with all things old, they become new again. So researchers and product development teams all across the country and the world are starting to realize, wow, variant analysis is pretty powerful. But it's important that you do proper root cause analysis because that'll lead into fruitful variant analysis. So starting out, vulnerabilities and what are they? If you never heard about a vulnerability, great, about to find out. So vulnerabilities are bugs that exist within a product that an attacker can abuse to achieve some form of action that isn't intended by the product owner. Seems pretty simple, right? You create a product, you want them to be able to open a link to open up to Google, a web browser, something, who knows? What if you can open a link and all of a sudden they're downloading all the files from your computer? Well, that's bad. That's not good. That's a bad day. So that would be a vulnerability and that would be an exploit. Some types of unintended actions, they can be anything. It can be sometimes just retrieval of sensitive information. They're saying, hey, I want access to that. Let me see it. Or maybe they want to modify something, right? Maybe they're modifying bank statements, or you want to just get complete control over the software program. Some of those are the most critical, highest impact vulnerabilities that lead into exploits that perform like complete control. So then we ask the question, all right, so with these vulnerabilities, you can have all kinds of different impacts. Does that mean they're all equal? No, vulnerabilities are not equal across the board. It's important to understand when you're looking at CVEIDs and you're looking at different types of impact lists. Most modern hardware and software these days have multiple mitigations in place that require multiple vulnerabilities to be able to be chained together to create an actual capability. This is important to understand because when you're doing root cause analysis and variant analysis, a lot of times people look at the basic mindset of saying, hey, I have this vulnerability here, and they want to look at it like tunnel vision, and they say, hey, I'm only going to focus on the components immediately adjacent or directly impacting this vulnerable piece of code. And that's bad. You don't want to do that. You want to look at the severity, the entirety of the entire product and understand all the relations between the vulnerable code and the entry points for all user mode, or not user mode, user data coming into the product, right? So once again, sometimes they only provide partial capabilities, but in order to want to have full control, you need a full chain, right? So what's a full chain? And these get kind of tricky. So as mentioned, a lot of the hardened targets, Windows, Linux, iOS, Android, Mac, all of these, they require multiple vulnerabilities in order to get like a proper exploit to obtain some form of control. right? And that's important. Chains, they can be built in many different ways. Sometimes you only need 2 bugs. Sometimes you might need 6 or 7 different bugs to achieve like whatever you're trying to aim for capability wise. It's common to understand that like a generic example is going to need to be an information leak paired with some form of arbitrary read write. And then from there, you can, depending on your platform, you can then get, code execution. Really dependent though upon what components you're targeting within the platform. And that's why I mentioned earlier, this talk isn't a deep dive. It's all about understanding the mindset, because all of that is completely dependent upon the platform and what components you're attacking for each individual target, right? Now, as a scary thought here, and just a general example, you have iOS full chain, 0-click iMessage exploits. I think right there we just hit every major buzzword. So if you're trying to become like a media person, that's what you got to say. Or you might want to throw like machine learning in there somewhere, like blockchain. Now, vulnerability manifestation. We talked about this earlier, vulnerability manifestation versus what we're going to talk about later, implementation. Starting out, it comes down to understanding impact, performing root cause analysis, and general vulnerability analysis. It is important to understand that manifestation matters. Now, what is manifestation? I'll give you a little joke real quick before we dive into it, but as like a general example, as a vulnerability researcher, it's a common joke that we follow developers around and see where they work, right? We go look and identify, hey, this person's responsible for all of these, not so nice features being implemented within all these products, right? We go check the Git logs, we go to GitHub, you go look around and you say, okay, you see they're working here, working here, working here. They introduced all these vulnerabilities. They're the ones who are manifesting the vulnerabilities, right? So the developers are manifesting the vulnerability. And we go look as researchers, we say, okay, they work here, we go look what they're working now, and 9 times out of 10, they're going to be manifesting the same vulnerability patterns in their new products, right? It's like a funny joke, but it actually happens. So it all comes full circle as a vulnerability manifestation through the developers and their poor secure development practices, right? Now that comes into big questions of like, well, how do you get them there? Well, you as a company, do you pay to have them do all their secure coding training and all that stuff? Who knows? But it's a giant full circle. Manifestation originates from the person who's developing the product. Now,
recording in progress.
Okay, so manifestation versus implementation. Vulnerabilities themselves are manifested through the developers, but the implementation is extremely important. And the reason for this is because if you take a generic concept of an out of bounds read write, if you don't know what that means, it's just basically saying you have a buffer of some form, whether it's a stack or a heap, and you're reading past the boundary or the total allocated space of that allocated buffer, whether it's on a heap, stack, maybe it's a kernel, who knows. So you're reading past it or you're writing past it. That's an out of bounds read write. At a generic level, that makes sense. We're all on the same page. Out of bounds read write performs this capability. You can write past or read past the end of a buffer, past the boundary. Now, implementation and why this matters, because that generic understanding of an out of bounds read write can be implemented in many different ways. Some of the most common ones you see everybody talk about are looking at the generic copy routines that everyone kind of jokes about. They're like, oh yeah, go grep for stir copy, go grep for mem copy, go grep for bang copy. Go analyze all these routines and go look at how they're all being utilized, look at the arguments being passed, all that. That's just one way, or that's two different ways right there: stir copy, mem copy, and then bang copy, all the other copy routines. There's lots of different ways for implementation to happen, and implementation matters. From a mindset, you have to be able to understand the language you're auditing, and you have to be able to understand saying, hey, I understand this language well enough that I know that I can understand the vulnerability class well enough also that we can identify and see when these vulnerabilities classes like out of bounds and all these different type of issues are being implemented in many different ways. So another example could be, instead of just using stir copy incorrectly, maybe there's a for loop or a while loop that's being executed where the attacker controls the boundary condition for the while or for loop. And then you just within that loop, you're just incrementing a pointer to a buffer and writing a byte. That could be bad, but that you have to be able to understand implementation can come in many different flavors. Like I said at the beginning of this conversation or this presentation, don't get stuck on techniques. Don't get stuck on understanding, hey, look for this. Understand at a high level what things are. And then you have to also understand at a low level to understand, hey, what does this actually look like and how is it implemented? Now, vulnerability classes. So within the world of vulnerabilities, we have the concept of vulnerability classes. These can be broken down into groups, top groups, subgroups. You know, in today's world, everybody loves groups, right? We're gonna create a group for this. We're gonna make a bottom group, top group, side group. You know, that's the world of vuln classes. It's important to understand though that these vuln classes, they're generic. They're, you know, some people are like, hey, here's this standard, here's this generic idea of like what these vuln classes are. But I'll be honest, it's completely up to researchers to some degree to decide what is going to constitute inside of a vuln class that they're interested in, right? The developer, the product owner also matters extremely well because they're creating a product and they're talking about vuln classes and they're creating groups to have for potential threats. Then they only want to include stuff that's relevant to their product. They don't want to include like vulnerabilities from other vuln classes for a different language that has nothing to do with their product. That's not good. That's bad. So then, you know, this idea leads into a bigger picture referencing vulnerability classes by language. Oh, we continuously come full circle. This is like a giant snowball, right? So vulnerability classes and now vulnerability classes by language. The same understanding that given vulnerability classes are subgroups within the top group, programming language, we can understand that each vulnerability class will have different implementations / manifestations. What does this mean? Because Robert, didn't you say earlier that manifestations come from the developers? Well, yes, I did. And when you're dealing with like programming languages, 9 times out of 10, you're gonna have documentation. And documentation is gonna be created by the developers of that programming language. They're gonna tell you how to use their native APIs. Understanding this basic concept is extremely important because, and I just wanna make this very clear, because when you're performing variant analysis, being able to understand code patterns, being able to say, hey, I understand the generic code pattern up to, or, you know, call flow analysis, or however you want to word it, up to X functionality, you can take that, hyper focus on it, pull it out of your equation, and then just go search for that everywhere else in the binary, whether it be opening a handle to a file so that you can then modify that file in some form or another, as an example. Right? And you break them down by languages, C, C++, .NET, Ruby, PHP, all that jazz. Now, we left vulnerabilities and now we're going to analysis techniques. What is variant analysis? I'll be honest, it just comes from the idea of taking a given vulnerability, you perform root cause analysis, and then you find a single identifier for that specific vulnerability, and you look around a product to identify more vulnerabilities that are similar. At a high level, this seems pretty straightforward, right? So we're taking a vulnerability, we perform root cause analysis, we're saying, hey, we understand what's happening, we understand why the vulnerability is here. And variant analysis, you might be wondering, comes after root cause analysis. So you have to make sure your root cause analysis is accurate. You want to make sure that is as accurate as possible. And we have to also think back earlier to the beginning of this conversation, this presentation, when we talked about questions we're asking and the answers we want, right? So when we're looking to identify performing root cause analysis, then finding a single identifier for that specific vulnerability, that is the question. We're building an equation, and our question is we want to find what single identifier stands out the most. That will make it easier for us to search the whole product to find similar code patterns for this vulnerability. Oh, wait, did I go too far? Yeah, okay, so wait, variant analysis, here we are, sorry about that. So as an example, one could be thought of, let's talk about like command injection within like a Soho router, right? So the basic vulnerability is a command injection that exists within the parsing of a post request parameter where the improper sanitization parsing of user data occurs before passing said argument or user data to system or exec. And then, you know, they do some bad things. We want to identify the code pattern and look for similar endpoints that call similar functions in the same pattern as the code before the initial vulnerability is reached. So before the point of where, hey, we're calling into system or exec with tainted user data that wasn't properly parsed or sanitized, we want to understand that call flow analysis and call flow path so that we can extract that from that specific case and go look for it everywhere else in the binary, right? A lazy person's way to doing this, and I'm going to be honest with you, this is what a lot of people do, a lot of researchers, and I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. It works, but you take system or you go grab for exec or something, and you just manually go through every single one. And you get pretty used to identifying, once again, patterns. So instead of automating the process, they just know it in their head. So they just, look at it and it's a lot faster. But I'm sure with automation, it'd probably be a lot smoother too. So we'll want to identify the code pattern and look for similar endpoints that call similar functions in the same pattern as the code before. That's what we just talked about. We want to look at the code before they call it a system or call it an exec, where the tainted data exists and is executed on. The issue is calls to a system exec and the similar. So you want to look for calls to those functions. You could, as one possible, like, hey, this is a lazy man's approach to variant analysis. Look for system exec calls. Now, what if we wanted to do cheat mode or be more effective with what we're doing to save more time, to be more efficient? We have to know what patterns to look for. And this comes down to efficiency is tied into how well you know your target and how well you know what question to ask. That's the most important thing out of everything that we're talking about. Questions. So one cheat code that can make the process easier is if we get lucky and they implemented a function specifically related to parsing of incoming user data within a parameter. So maybe they have their own special routine, their own special function, and this function is parsing, user data. That's great. We know that if we check cross references to that function globally within a product, we can see everywhere the developers are currently checking parameters for, for those incoming endpoints, right? So if it's its own standalone routine, we cross-reference that routine, we know, hey, there's some form of user parsing of incoming data happening at this location in the binary or product, maybe it's in some standalone library. Now, that's great, but we would have to look at every single function call where that function is called. And that's fine, that's cool, but what if we want to save even more time and be way more effective and more efficient, right? We don't want to sit and have to go manually review 400 calls to this routine. That would take a lot of time, but once again, time, you'd probably find some other bugs, but I like to be more efficient. So let's see if we can ask ourselves a different question and we'll get a better answer. Now, instead of looking for cross references to said parser function or that routine, whatever you want to call it, what about we look for code patterns related to the retrieval of user data within a parameter, right? That sounds pretty cool. So now you have to also remember that one route, the first route we're looking at saying, hey, we know for a fact that parsing is happening here because they're calling this routine, and this routine is only for parsing user data from these functions or from these endpoints. That's it. This routine is not used for anything else. So that's a very great way to approach it, but time consuming because you're going to have a lot of results returned. You could also say, hey, what about we just look at the code that's responsible for extracting, this user data from these parameters, right? That they get sent to these endpoints. You can then search globally for that pattern, and then you'll be able to say, hey, maybe they forgot to look, or maybe they forgot to call that routine that's responsible for parsing the incoming user data. So there's multiple different ways you can look for how to ask a question. So the first case, just to go over this again, because I know this is the most important part I want to drive home. So the first question we're asking is we're saying to ourselves mentally, we want to say, hey, where else in this binary could we find this vulnerability? This hypothetical root cause scenario, how do we find and perform variant analysis to find even more bugs? Well, we know that this standalone function does parsing. Great. So we're going to enumerate every single place where that function is used and then go look and see if they're using it badly or poorly or who knows, right? That's the first question you ask yourself. And that should work. It should be effective. It'll take time, but it's going to be effective. The second question we ask ourselves is, okay, how about we just look for places where they're not calling? You know, is it going to be as, let's see, what's the word? As accurate? No, you're going to have false positives, right? But with those false positives, you're going to be able to find different answers, or maybe you find different endpoints or different call flows where that check routine, that parser is never called, right? So then that's a variant of the first bug, which was just, hey, maybe they improperly parse something. I don't know. But the point is that you want to understand that your end goal question that you want an answer for can vary between approaches. And the more you do this, the more you start understanding, hey, I want to ask this type of question and I want this type of answer. So we're doing variance analysis. Now we're going to go into RCA, which is root cause analysis. Once again, before you get into variance analysis, you have to do root cause analysis, right? With improper root cause analysis, we run into an issue such as a failed patch. These failed patches are quite common, plague many different products. You got mom and pop shops, you got big hitters like Microsoft, Apple, Google. Everyone's at risk for this, right? Everyone has failed patches, part of the game. Root cause analysis will definitely help improve that. So with proper root cause analysis, you'll be able to extract the proper code patterns for use to perform variance analysis. Now you might be wondering to yourself, this is interesting. Why do we keep talking about variance analysis so much? It's extremely, extremely powerful. And it's been around for a long time, but for some reason, people just forget things and it's coming back to the surface. And I really think companies need to start understanding that proper variance analysis, proper root cause analysis is going to save you not only money, because this is a huge bottleneck, right? If you think about it, a lot of the bug bounties, we had to talk on this last week over a similar issue of being able to perform proper root cause analysis, right? That's a bottleneck, because if you have a bunch of resources who don't know how to do that, and you're getting a large amount of incoming reports of bugs, and you can't perform proper root cause analysis, every time you think you're patching a bug and you're spending resources for these senior people to come in and verify and apply patches, then you just have to go back and fix the same bug 2 weeks later. That's an issue. That's costing money. All it takes is initial upfront, perform proper root cause analysis, have the right resources at your disposal that are performing the analysis, and you're good, right? Now, we mentioned the plague. Last week, we talked about bug bounties at ISACA. But here's just another example. So a lot of people use root cause analysis. In fact, it's beyond just vulnerabilities. Root cause goes for everything in life. You could be a mechanic. You could be an airplane pilot. You have a problem, you have to perform analysis to identify what the root cause of that problem is. Now, some of these places that implement this within the security domains are bug bounties, internal audits, external audits, offensive and defensive. Some of the most common ones, right? Just because these places are performing root cause analysis does not mean it's implemented correctly. And once again, most of the time, you have a small set of resources that might not fully understand to the degree that they're being hired to perform. So then all of these bugs that are being reported are only briefly looked at, and you have a small amount of window of time to verify and allocate. And then you got to push it off to senior people to go verify, and then that just costs more money. So this is why they're failing, most of them, or lots of them actually. So what questions do we ask ourselves? Similar to variance analysis, root cause analysis comes down to the question you are asking. And these questions can be anything, right? You could ask like, hey, is this crashing within a standalone function? Is the standalone function the vulnerable part? Is the vulnerability being implemented because of an imported function within a third-party library? Maybe the library isn't even our responsibility, right? It could be third-party. Is the issue present because we're passing the wrong arguments to a given function? That happens a lot too. You have a function you create, people don't read the documentation properly. You start passing wrong arguments, wrong data types, and boom, bad stuff. Now, these questions might seem mundane, but they're actually pretty important, because how you solve for the first question of a standalone function that's vulnerable is going to be completely different than if you're dealing with something where someone's passing the wrong arguments to a function, right? The caller is saying, hey, callee, I know you want these data types, but I'm going to shove you a bunch of arguments that are not the data type that you request. All right. How you solve for those questions is completely different. Now, same thing with variant analysis. We have cheat modes for success. Let's go over an example of, hey, is this a standalone function that is vulnerable? The reason we might ask this question is because it will play a part in the analysis of said vulnerability. You get your crash dump, you get your seg fault, you get your whatever, and you're like, hey, why are we crashing here? Then you say, if the vulnerability, let's say hypothetically, it's its own function, and it's a standalone function that's a custom memory allocator, deallocator, where the development team's like, hey, if we just perform this simple patch from the function, it'll prevent exploitation, right? That's a simple fix. That's an easy fix. However, if the vulnerability exists because the caller is not passing proper arguments, then this is also an easy fix, but it changes that dynamic of how you fix it. So then at that point, you can say, hey, you have two routes. Either fix the code responsible for passing the arguments, or you add more checks within the allocator, deallocator itself, to harden it. Everyone wants to talk about harden these days. Everything's being hardened. They're like, hey, let's harden the kernel. Let's harden, memory allocators. Let's do all this stuff. But at the end of the day, if you're just passing the wrong arguments and you want to, add like a safety net, hardening the allocator, deallocator could be possible. But what you're looking for within root cause analysis is going to vary between those two cases. And then not only that, but depending on which of these two issues, so if it was a vulnerability in the allocator, deallocator, or if it was a vulnerability because the caller is passing the wrong arguments, those two simple things will change how you perform your variant analysis, right? Because there's two different answers require two different questions. And that's important. Like I said, remember that it comes down to the question you are asking. Now, let's wrap this all up, right? So if you're just popping back in here and you're gone the past, I don't know, however time, like 30 minutes or so, all that matters is the questions you ask. You can achieve any answer you want. However, if you ask the wrong questions, you will get the wrong answers. And I mean this wholeheartedly. None of this stuff, don't worry about techniques. Don't worry about, running a command, typing it in. None of that matters. When you're performing root cause analysis, you're performing variant analysis, and you're trying to eliminate vulnerabilities in mass and actually understand what's plaguing your product, you have to ask the right questions. And it comes down to mindset. You cannot approach this as saying, hey, we're going to tunnel vision this, and we're going to only focus on this one bug. That does not improve security. The amount of bugs you patch does not mean security posture is being improved. That is a huge myth. And if that was the case, then all these companies would have amazing security postures. Google, Apple, they'd be improving every year because they're patching all these bugs, but they continue to make the same mistakes over and over. The amount of bugs you patch is not synonymous with being how secure your product is. What's going to matter is what question you ask and the answer you want. If you're trying to eliminate a vulnerability class from a platform, and we have another talk on this also going over understanding attack patterns by a platform, right? So whatever you develop on, if you're developing on Windows, Linux, Mac, iOS, Android, you need to start implementing, if you're a security researcher or development team, or you're just product owner, it doesn't matter. You have to understand the native issues with your platform and what abuse cases are present, right? This matters a lot because then you run into issues like symbolic junction attacks, where it was like a vulnerability class that just continuously printed ODays. Like it was nonstop. Everyone was vulnerable. But that was an issue within Windows itself. So you would have all these third-party developers, teams, and all these people creating products for Windows that didn't know how to defend against this because it was baked into the platform itself natively. That's an issue. If you don't know how to ask the question of how to solve that, and you just treat it as like, hey, I'm going to patch every single bug that gets reported to us individually, that's not solving a problem. You could have saved so much time, resource, monies, everything else if you just focused on root cause analysis at the beginning, understand why is this vulnerability happening, invest resources into the point of saying, okay, we need to understand how this is happening and how do we prevent it, right? Don't just rely on other people to secure software for you. That doesn't make sense. If you're using a product, using a platform, you are responsible. You inherit all those native security issues. you import a third-party library to your software or product, you are saying, hey, I take responsibility, right? That is important. And that's a mindset that we need to start sharing, because it all comes down to this: questions. But I can go on forever talking about this issue and the security world, but hopefully this helped some people understand what variant analysis is, root cause analysis, understand, exploits, vulnerabilities, going over like mindset and methodology behind how do you approach this and how are you effective, because there's lots of different ways to solve a problem, right? But if you can solve a problem and get the most impact for your patch, then that's better, right? So I think that's pretty much it. I mean, am I allowed to stop my screen share, or how's that work? Does anyone have questions? We can talk.
Yeah. So John had a question. So John, I'm gonna unmute you, unmute everybody. So there you go. And you can stop your screen share if you want to.
Oh, okay.
Hello.
There you go, John.
Thanks, Robert, for the great presentation. I thought that was good. I'm just curious because it sounded like you were hinting at trying to make things more efficient by automating things.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if it would be useful to get savvy with a code QL, be able to quickly recognize
Isn't that from SEMO? SEMO? I think I've heard of that before. Or did they get acquired?
Yeah, code QL is bought by GitHub.
It's GitHub.
Okay, yeah. No, that stuff's like amazing. Yeah, I would definitely recommend code QL. It will save your life. And I mean, I played with it a while back, like 2 years ago. I was messing with, I believe it was at the time, the Android kernel. And we were trying to identify, like, just quickly finding like stack overflows. But I mean, it's hit or miss. You have to define, once again, you have to understand the vulnerability class you're looking for. You have to know how it's going to be implemented, and how from there you have to be able to say, okay, I want to look for this type of pattern, right? You can take the generic patterns, but everyone's going to be running the code against it anyway. So you want to create your own custom patterns, and then you have to be able to understand, like, are they effective in finding the type of vulnerability you want? That's the biggest thing. But code QL, definitely recommend. Yeah, they'd be cool.
And traditionally, let's say without code QL, would you just be using some kind of like string matching, or like what exactly are you using? Are you like an awk master, or like doing crazy shit?
Nah, nothing like that. Nah. So I'll be honest, a lot of it, if I'm approaching it from the mindset of like, hey, I normally don't just blindly go attack a target, right? So I have an understanding. I look at the attack surface, I look at my attack vectors, and I have like an initial thought process of what I want to look for. And so if I'm looking at, like, let's say like a router, or maybe like just some system service in Windows that's like, has an open port listening on something, I'll automatically know in my mind, like, hey, I know the code responsible for standing up a network socket. I know the code responsible for parsing, incoming packets from the network. I know what's going to look like parsing, incoming parameters to an endpoint. So I already know that in my mind. So I just grab for like basic things like the functions. I do the lazy man. I cheat. I'll be honest. It's lazy, but it's effective, right? A little bit time consuming, but you already kind of know what you're looking for. If you weren't familiar with that stuff, I would just say, if you're starting out and you're like, hey, I'm kind of curious, like, what to look for, I'll be honest, like, just go write some products, go create some basic code, go look at like standing up your own little, like, privileged daemon in Linux or something, and just play around with it, experiment, look at how you would develop that yourself. And then once you develop it, you then step back and say, okay, I know how this works. I know how it's implemented. I know the manifestation. From there, you can then just like take all that knowledge you have and then build a little pattern or like identifiers of what you want to look for. And that's like the biggest gist.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
I know you just said you usually use grep to get started. Have you ever looked at things like symgrep, Jorn, Coxie grep, etc.
Yeah, so I've seen those. I'll be honest, I've never used them myself though, but I hear great things about them. I remember there's this person Parsia like Parsia Hakimian. I can't remember his name, but he's on Twitter and he's like, I remember he posts a lot of stuff about like SimGrep and
Mhm.
it's how effective it is. So that might be something I want to check into. I just haven't looked at it myself yet.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Anybody else got questions? Anything you want to talk about? Oh, we can talk about the weather. I mean, the weather's going good.
This is good. This is good, Robert. I appreciate it. For those of you that this was your first time at an OWASP talk, please come back. We also have an OWASP Twitter handle. Follow events there. We have an OWASP Slack. If you haven't joined the OWASP overall global Slack channel, then please do so. And then last but not least, please support the OWASP Atlanta chapter. Go to OWASP.org. There's a donate link on the left, and then you can define the Atlanta chapter and help us out to just maintain the growth and the funds that we use, hopefully in a post-pandemic world, so we can do some stuff together. But I'll open it up one more time for any questions for Robert. Robert, as always, pleasure. It sounds like everyone really benefited from this talk, but please feel free to share this video that's going to be online with any of your colleagues and friends that may not have had a chance to partake today.
Yeah, no, it was a super cool time of day. I mean, I enjoyed the presentation. It's always an honor to be able to come here and give these talks. I know it's probably not the most formal or like, hey, I'm more of like, let's just be honest, straightforward, dive into the point, look at the positives, the negatives, and just have a good time through it and like a conversation. We can pretty much do like any kind of presentation though. So if y'all have any insight or maybe you have questions or maybe you're like, hey, vulnerabilities, can we look at stuff from X and U? Can we have a talk on, maybe the power of dtrace? I love dtrace. I'm a huge fan of dtrace. I haven't touched it in a while because I haven't done X and U stuff in a bit, but dtrace is very powerful. We can do talks on, we can look at Android, we can look at Windows. It's just a matter of what y'all want. Whatever y'all want to see, what you want to learn about. Harder talk. Yeah, I mean, yeah, Tim knows what's up. Tim gets it. It depends what y'all want to see. Y'all want to see some fun, more technical stuff, and you're like, hey, theory and all this stuff's great, but I already know a little bit and I want to learn more. Hey, we can bring that too. It's just a matter of what y'all want.
I'm curious on your thoughts, and I realize this is a huge tangent, so if there's not time, cool. There's been talks recently with, PAC MTE coming live, or PAC already live, MTE coming up. Do you see binary exploitation as we see it today going away, or just becoming significantly harder?
I mean, so PAC stuff was already like, I mean, didn't Luca already kind of break a lot of that, and also P0?
Yeah, so like, I'm saying
Yeah.
PAC's been broken probably 14 or 15 times now, but all of those have been fixed to date. But I imagine Apple will continue to make it better, cross fingers.
I mean, they could. I mean, what was the other mitigation you mentioned?
MTE, memory tagging extension, is part of the new ARM stuff.
Yeah, I remember. So I haven't looked at it on ARM yet. I remember it was like a year ago, Microsoft released a document going over like their projected working with their desired implementation of memory tagging. And I think a lot of it comes down to their issues with their threat model, and what they said in the document, if I remember correctly, was centered around there's still abusable cases, but the function and routines that are provided to people to utilize, you would have to like forcibly use the wrong functions, I guess, associated with like specific privileged instructions, if I understood correctly, so that you can change like the actual bits for like some data, right? So you would have like memory data, and then they get assigned a bit. And that bit is only controllable through privileged or what is there? How do they say privileged instructions? I can't remember what they call them, but you'll have privileged CPU instructions that are allowed to operate with those memory tagging related instructions. So the only way you would be able to abuse that if you were able to like build some weird like what did they call it? Like instead of like a ROP, you have like a ROP chain built for setting up and calling into the privileged memory tagging instructions so that you can then change and modify the instruction bits for whatever data you're messing with or trying to abuse. So you would have to have that prior like capability before you can even begin exploitation, if I understood when I read their document. But I mean, if Microsoft thinks that it's still abusable to some degree, I mean, I would say it's probably still abusable. Just depends on what type of capabilities can be found prior to exploitation, as far as like setting up the ability to change the bits for those data types.
Okay, got it. Since you just brought up ROP, have you had issues bypassing CFG protections for Windows? If that's something you can talk about, I actually don't know.
So I haven't touched on CFG. So yeah, I haven't messed with it too much. But I know it's there, but I just haven't messed with it.
Okay, how about CFI? Same thing.
I mean, yeah, I haven't messed with that either. A lot of the targets I've been looking at, they haven't been implementing those yet.
Okay, cool. Just curious, and I guess I should apologize. So CFG is control flow guard, and CFI is control flow integrity, and there are Windows protections that, or excuse me, Microsoft protections that are supposed to help prevent the use of ROP chains and other types of attack paths that are really common nowadays.
Yeah, and they'll set up like a call, like a call table for like authenticated calls for a specific like binary. Like here's the allowed indirect calls, and here's this table. So you'd have to like modify that table to then inject like a different indirect call or something, right? So isn't that like one of them?
I think that is, yeah. I mean, I don't really do a lot of Windows stuff, so I was just curious, since that's something I have little knowledge of.
I think that's one of them, is because they have that table, because it's supposed to also like eliminate indirect call, like use after free vulnerabilities, because they were like, hey, people are just like taking this, then they're going to allocate like whatever function pointer they want here. And so they were like, we need to create something that's going to basically try and eliminate that to some degree. So they had this like vetting process of like, here's this like table, and here's all these function pointers. And then if the function pointer is not in this table and you get to this indirect call, you have a previous call before the actual indirect call happens that verifies, I think it's called like iCall or something, or like, I don't know, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I've seen it before. But then it just checks that table to make sure that the function pointer is being passed is within that table itself. I think that's for like the CFG or something. I don't know. It's been a while, but
yeah, appreciate it. I mean, that sounds right to me for what that's worth.
You're good, man. I enjoy these conversations. I don't know everything, but you know,
Same.
like it's pretty chill. Like, yeah, we can dive into some kernel stuff, John. I can sync up with Mr. Tony and Z and Goulet, and we can go see if they'll allow us some time to do that. So that would be cool. Like, do you have any preferences? Like, would you prefer like last time I looked at like GNU, it was all about kexts. Are kexts still a thing? I think they might have eliminated those. I don't know.
They're technically not a thing, but there's still plenty floating around.
Ah, okay.
They're now all drivers.
Oh, there's driver land now?
Yeah, they made that mistake. Well, probably shouldn't call a mistake yet, but it's not looking great. I'm not biased or anything though.
Nah, I remember we were looking at so like a lot of the kexts, they're having setups with like using old school stuff like set socket and like get socket opt and being able to pass arguments from user mode to them. And a lot of them, like, they would have this thing that was within the code for the kext. I forget, it was like cuddle flag privileged or something within like the kernel structure for the actual like incoming kext from the user mode. And that flag, if it was set within the kernel extension, you would have to be root in order to actually, for it to actually like accept and parse the incoming I can't remember, the incoming packet from user mode. And I think that's how they implemented like some form of like authentication was through that single flag. And so you'd have all these texts and you would just grep for like, hey, you know, current cuddle flag set privileged or kernel flag privileged or something. And you would just look to see if that was enabled or not within the text. And then you're like, oh, okay, we can access this this socket option here, and you send commands to it if it didn't have one or the flag wasn't set. So that was pretty fun. But yeah, they changed the driver mode now.
So for those of you that might be interested in doing research work, specifically around offensive security measures and focusing on zero-day development, doing reversing and VR work, VS Labs is actually hiring. So if you want more information with that, then feel free to direct any sort of inquiries to Rob. And you can easily get a hold of him around that subject at jobs@versprite.com. But just wanted to plug that in for you, Rob.
Oh, most definitely. Like, is it cool if I do a little like talk real quick about the research team? Is that okay?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. Z, I want to make sure you're good with it.
I'm good with it.
Oh, cool. All right. So I'm gonna be honest, I'm trying to change the game when it comes to research. All right. And what I mean by that is like most shops, most places, most research engagements, everything is very, very like time tracking, and you have to clock into this physical location and you have to go to the skiff or something really boring. And it's not about that. We want to do high impact work, high impact vulnerabilities, high impact exploits. We want to create a platform so that researchers can then come in and get paid well, comparatively speaking, and then also be able to share that research publicly. And we have some other routes as well. And I think that depending on what people want to target, we're looking at mobile, we're looking at desktop stuff, primarily platform specific, not necessarily looking at just exploiting random third-party software. We want to exploit the platforms themselves. And we're looking for senior capabilities. So depending on what you want to do, like we operate pretty chill. Like it's make your own schedule. We require updates 2 mandatory days a week though regarding time is Monday and Friday. So Monday we have company-wide meetings. Fridays we have end of week group syncs for this research team individually. Throughout the week you have to do updates, whether you get stuck, whether you're not stuck, maybe you need to buy some different hardware or something, you just drop a line, we communicate. But the big push is to have a life outside of research, right? Like I'm not a big fan of you just doing research 24/7 and then becoming burned out and not wanting to touch your computer. Because that's a very real thing. And I see it continuously happen to a lot of my friends, colleagues, and it's real. So I would rather create a project, give it a decent timeline, and then prevent a burnout as much as possible. Because when you're diving into this stuff, I know how easy it is to get sidetracked, and then 12, 13, 15 hours goes by and you're like, oh, wow, it's only been a day. So it's important to have that healthy relationship between work, your life, and understand that there's a life outside of research. But if you like doing cool stuff, you want to get paid, you want to like submit publicly, go compete at competitions, all that fun stuff, then just hit me up. It's pretty chill. I think it's pretty unique. I think people would like it, So yeah, don't be shy.
All right, not to put you on the spot, does that mean y'all are competing at Pwned on mobile?
I wish, but nah, not this year. No, I wish, but that'd be cool. Yeah.
All right. Anybody have anything else? Well, if not, thank you, Robert. Once again, you are wonderful. Appreciate your time, and everyone else for joining us tonight. And hopefully we will see you guys and ladies, I guess that's me, next month. But thank you. Everyone have a great evening.
You too, Z. Take care, everybody.
Awesome, guys. Thanks.